Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the airlock corridor of Harmony's Edge station, watching the incoming shuttle through the reinforced window. Her reflection stared back at her, dark hair pulled into a practical bun, white lab coat crisp and new. She had been on the station for 3 weeks now, still adjusting to the way gravity felt different here, still learning which food dispensers carried items humans could actually eat. The shuttle docked with a metallic clang that reverberated through the floor. Sarah straightened her shoulders and checked the datapad in her hand one more time. Commander Vrath of the Kravathi Empire, warrior scientist, decorated military officer, expert in xenobiology with 17 published research papers. Her new research partner. The airlock hissed open. Sarah's breath caught in her throat despite all her training and preparation. Vrath was massive. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his body covered in sleek fur that shifted between dark gray and black. His face was angular and sharp, with eyes that glowed a faint amber in the station's lighting. His mouth was lined with teeth designed for tearing meat. His hands ended in retractable claws that clicked softly against the metal floor as he walked. Behind him, 2 smaller figures emerged from the shuttle, cubs. They were perhaps 3 feet tall, covered in lighter gray fur that still had the soft fluffiness of youth. Their eyes were huge in their small faces, darting around nervously at everything they saw. They stayed close to Vrath's legs, almost hiding behind him. Sarah had read the files. She knew that most species on the station gave the Kravathi wide berth. The galaxy's apex predators, they called them. A species that had evolved from pack hunters on a death world where everything fought for survival. Other aliens whispered that Kravathi could smell fear, that they viewed kindness as weakness, that they respected only strength. But Sarah also noticed something the files hadn't mentioned. Vrath looked exhausted. There were shadows under his glowing eyes. His shoulders were tense in a way that spoke of constant vigilance rather than aggression. And the way he positioned himself between his cubs and the rest of the station told her everything she needed to know. "Commander Vrath," Sarah said, stepping forward with her hand extended. "Welcome to Harmony's Edge. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen." Vrath stared at her hand for a long moment. His claws flexed almost unconsciously. Then, carefully, he took her hand in his much larger one. His grip was surprisingly gentle. "Dr. Chen," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel grinding together. "Thank you for agreeing to this assignment. I understand it was not your first choice," Sarah blinked. "Actually, I requested this assignment specifically. Your research on cross-species biological adaptation is fascinating. I've read all your papers." Something flickered across Vrath's face. Surprise, maybe. Or suspicion. The cubs peeked out from behind him, their small noses twitching as they scented the air. "My offspring," Vrath said, his tone becoming formal and stiff. "Kira and Torvin, station regulations require family accommodation. I submitted the proper documentation." "If this presents a problem..." "No problem at all," Sarah interrupted. She crouched down slowly, bringing herself closer to the cub's eye level. "Hello, Kira. Hello, Torvin. I'm Sarah. You're going to be living here on the station with your father." The cubs stared at her with wide amber eyes. Kira made a small chirping sound. Torvin's ears flattened against his head. "They do not speak standard yet," Vrath said, "and they are not accustomed to other species. I will keep them controlled." Sarah stood up, frowning slightly. "Commander, they're children. They don't need to be controlled. They just need to be safe and comfortable." Vrath's expression became even more guarded. "Other species have expressed concern. The station director received 14 formal complaints before we even arrived." "Then those species need to learn some manners," Sarah said flatly. She picked up her datapad and started walking down the corridor. "Come on, I'll show you to the lab first, then your quarters. The lab has been modified according to your specifications. Temperature controls, atmospheric adjustments, the works." Vrath followed her, his cubs staying close to his sides. Sarah could hear other beings in the corridors ahead ducking into side passages and doorways. She saw a Zenthari delegate press himself against the wall as they passed, his herbivore eyes wide with fear. A cluster of Belizean traders scattered like startled birds. Sarah kept walking, keeping up a steady stream of information about the station layout, the research facilities, the meal schedules. She pretended not to notice the stares and whispers. She pretended not to see the way Vrath's shoulders grew more tense with each frightened reaction. The laboratory was in the science wing, a large open space with multiple workstations and state-of-the-art equipment. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the stars beyond, and the lighting could be adjusted to match different species' needs. "This is incredible," Vrath said quietly, looking around the space. His claws retracted fully for the first time since he'd arrived. "We'll be studying protein adaptation in extreme environments," Sarah said, pulling up holographic displays. "Your work on thermophilic organisms combined with my research on human genetic flexibility should give us some interesting results." She launched into an explanation of her research proposals, losing herself in the science. Behind her, she heard soft pattering sounds. The cubs were exploring the lab, sniffing at equipment and peering into storage containers. Vrath worked beside her for the next few hours, his exhaustion seeming to fade as they discussed methodology and experimental design. Sarah found him brilliant and surprisingly easy to work with. He listened carefully to her ideas and offered insightful suggestions. Once he almost smiled when she made a joke about bureaucratic paperwork. The cubs grew quieter as time passed. Sarah glanced over and saw them curled up beneath one of the work tables, pressed close together. They had fallen asleep on the hard metal floor. Without thinking about it, Sarah crossed to the emergency supply cabinet and pulled out a thermal blanket. It was standard equipment for stations, designed to retain body heat in case of environmental system failure. She shook it out quietly and walked over to the table. The cubs were breathing slowly, their small bodies rising and falling in sync. Kira's paw was tucked under her chin. Torvin's tail was wrapped around his sister protectively. Sarah crouched down and carefully draped the blanket over them, tucking it gently around their shoulders. The fabric was soft and warm. The cubs stirred slightly but didn't wake, settling deeper into sleep. When Sarah straightened up and turned around, Vrath was standing absolutely still. He was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. His amber eyes were wide, his claws fully retracted, his whole body frozen. "They get cold easily," Sarah said quietly. "The station keeps things cooler than Kravathi worlds, right? I can adjust the lab temperature if you'd like." Vrath didn't respond. He just kept staring at her. Sarah suddenly felt uncertain. Had she done something wrong? Violated some cultural taboo? She knew relatively little about Kravathi social customs beyond what was in the official files. "Commander, are you all right?" Vrath's mouth opened, then closed. His claws flexed once, twice. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "No one has ever done that before." Sarah waited for him to continue, but he didn't. He turned back to the holographic display, his movements stiff and mechanical. But Sarah noticed his eyes kept drifting to the table where his cubs slept, warm and safe beneath the blanket. They worked in silence for the rest of the afternoon. But something had changed in the air between them, something fragile and new, like the first shoots of trust breaking through frozen ground. The days settled into a routine that surprised Vrath more than he wanted to admit. Each morning he arrived at the lab with Kira and Torvin. Each morning Dr. Chen greeted them all with the same calm warmth, as if having Kravathi cubs in a research facility was the most natural thing in the galaxy. She had adjusted the lab temperature by 3 degrees. She claimed it was for the bacterial cultures they were working with, but Vrath noticed it matched the average temperature of Kravathi habitat domes. She had also requisitioned soft floor mats and placed them beneath the work tables without comment. The cubs had claimed the space under Table 3 as their den. Vrath watched them now as they played quietly with a set of data cubes Sarah had given them, simple toys that showed different colors and shapes when pressed. Kira chirped happily when she made a blue pyramid appear. Torvin pounced on the cube and his sister tumbled over with a play growl. "The protein chains are stabilizing at 47 degrees, Sarah said, studying the holographic data in front of them. "That's 15 degrees higher than I predicted." Vrath leaned closer to examine the results. "Your human cellular adaptation factors were conservative. Humans evolved on a world with extreme temperature variations, yes?" "Depends on the region," Sarah said. "But yeah, humans are adaptable. We had to be. We didn't have thick fur or claws or armored skin, just stubbornness and the ability to sweat." She said it with humor, but Vrath heard the truth beneath it. Humans were persistence predators, not the fastest or strongest, but relentless, patient. They ran their prey to exhaustion over days if necessary. The galaxy was still trying to understand what that meant for a species with starships and diplomacy. A soft whimpering sound came from under the table. Vrath's ears swiveled instantly toward his cubs. Torvin was holding his paw up, his small face scrunched in distress. He had caught one of his claws on the edge of a data cube, and a tiny drop of blood welled up from the quick. Vrath moved immediately, but Sarah was already there. She knelt beside the table, her movements slow and careful. "Oh, buddy, that looks like it hurts," she said softly. "Can I see?" Torvin looked at his father. Vrath gave a small nod. The cub extended his paw toward Sarah hesitantly. She examined the injury with gentle fingers. "It's not deep. Just a little scratch. Hold on, I've got something for this." Sarah went to the medical cabinet and returned with a small first aid kit. Vrath watched tensely as she cleaned the tiny wound with an antiseptic wipe and applied a liquid bandage that would seal and protect it. "There we go," Sarah said. "All better." "You're very brave, Torvin." The cub chirped at her, then licked her hand. Sarah laughed and ruffled the fur on his head before standing up. Vrath's throat felt tight. On Cravathi worlds, adults outside the immediate family did not touch another's cubs. It was a violation of pack hierarchy. It could start blood feuds. Yet here was this human, this stranger, treating his son's minor injury as if it were the most normal thing in the universe. "Dr. Chen," he started, then stopped. He did not know what he wanted to say. Sarah was already back at her station, scrolling through data. "We should run the next batch at 50 degrees and see if the trend continues. What do you think?" Vrath forced himself to focus on the work, but part of his mind kept circling back to the way Sarah had spoken to Torvin. The gentleness in her voice. The ease of her movements. She showed no fear of his cubs, but more than that, she showed no fear of him. Most species could not separate adult Cravathi from the threat they represented. They saw the claws, the teeth, the predator instincts, and their own ancient prey animal responses kicked in. Even species that were predators themselves maintained careful distance. It was safer that way. It was logical. Sarah had brought coffee for herself and a warm broth for Vrath that matched Cravathi nutritional needs. She had researched his species' dietary requirements. She had programmed the food dispensers to include options his cubs could eat. Small things. Thoughtful things. Things no one had ever done for him before. The morning stretched into afternoon. They ran experiments, recorded data, and debated methodology. Sarah argued her points with passion and backed them up with evidence. When Vrath proved her wrong with additional data, she laughed and conceded gracefully. When he was wrong, she corrected him without making him feel inadequate. Working with her was nothing like working with other Cravathi. His own species valued hierarchy above all else. Disagreement was challenge. Challenge was threat. Vrath had learned to be careful with his words, to couch his ideas in ways that did not threaten senior researchers' positions. Sarah did not care about hierarchy. She cared about being right, and she did not seem to mind when Vrath was right instead. "I'm going to grab lunch," Sarah said, stretching her arms over her head. "Want me to bring something back for you and the cubs?" "That is not necessary," Vrath said automatically. "I'm going anyway. It's no trouble." Sarah was already pulling up the cafeteria menu on her data pad. "What do Cravathi cubs like?" "The files say high protein, low plant matter. But what about taste preferences?" Vrath hesitated. Kira and Torvin had been eating standard rations since they arrived. Nutritionally complete but bland. They prefer foods with salt, and they like when meat is slightly warmed. "Got it. Back in 20 minutes. She left before Vrath could protest further. He stood in the empty lab, listening to his cubs play beneath the table, and felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. He did not understand this human. Her behavior made no tactical sense. Showing kindness to another predator species gained her nothing. It could even be seen as weakness by other species on the station. Yet she did it anyway, as naturally as breathing. Sarah returned with a large container of food. She had gotten fresh meat strips, warmed and lightly salted, arranged on a plate, for the cubs. Vrath watched as his children ate eagerly, their tails wagging with pleasure. "Good?" Sarah asked, smiling at them. Kira chirped and Torvin made a happy growling sound deep in his throat. Sarah laughed. "I'll take that as a yes." That night, Vrath lay awake in his quarters while his cubs slept in their nest of blankets. He stared at the ceiling and thought about the way Sarah had bandaged Torvin's paw. The way she had brought them food they actually enjoyed. The way she never flinched when he moved too quickly or spoke too roughly. On Cravath, strength was everything. You protected your pack and you dominated all others. You showed no weakness because weakness meant death. Vrath had raised his cubs alone after their mother died in a military action. He had learned to be both fierce protector and gentle caregiver. but he had learned to hide the gentleness from everyone outside his family. The galaxy saw Cravathi as monsters, as weapons, as useful soldiers and dangerous neighbors. No one ever looked at a Cravathi and saw someone who sang their cubs to sleep, or worried when they were sick or felt their heart break when they were hurt. No one except, apparently, one stubborn human scientist who treated his children like they were just children. Vrath closed his eyes and made a decision. He would watch Sarah Chen carefully. He would try to understand what motivated her. Because if humans could be this kind to species they barely knew, if they could show gentleness to those the galaxy feared, then maybe they were the most dangerous predators of all, or maybe, Vrath thought as he drifted toward sleep, maybe they were something the galaxy needed desperately, something it had been missing. Someone who could look at monsters and see people instead. 3 weeks into their partnership, Vrath noticed something peculiar. The other humans on Harmony's Edge had started behaving differently around him. It began small. A human engineer held the door open for him instead of letting it close in his face. A human medical officer nodded politely in the corridor, rather than crossing to the other side. A human trader in the station market offered his cubs small pieces of fruit, asking if they were allowed to eat it rather than assuming they would bite her hand. Vrath mentioned it to Sarah one morning while they prepared the day's experiments. "Your species is unusual," he said carefully. "Other humans are no longer avoiding me." Sarah looked up from the sample she was preparing.
"Why would they avoid you?"
"Because I am Cravathi. We are predators. Dangerous." "So are we," Sarah said, returning her attention to her work. "Humans are predators too. Maybe that's why we're not scared." But Vrath knew it was more than that. He had worked with other predator species before. They understood the danger he represented. They respected it with careful distance. Humans seemed to recognize the danger and then decide it did not matter. Dr. Marcus Webb, another human scientist, started joining them for lunch. He brought sandwiches from Earth and told terrible jokes that made Sarah groan. He also brought picture books for Kira and Torvin, simple stories with bright illustrations. "My daughter loved these when she was little," Marcus said, setting them on the floor near the cubs. "She's 14 now. Too cool for picture books anymore." Kira pawed at one of the books curiously. The pages were made of some flexible material that would not tear easily. "Smart design for small hands. Or paws, your offspring," Vrath said. "She is well? Growing like a weed. Taller than her mom now." Marcus pulled out his datapad and showed Vrath a picture. A young human female with dark skin and bright eyes, smiling widely. "That's Emma. She wants to be a pilot." Vrath stared at the image. Marcus was showing him a picture of his child. Voluntarily, proudly. "On Cravath, you did not show images of your cubs to outsiders. You did not speak of them fondly where others might hear. Information about your offspring was information that could be used against you." "She looks strong," Vrath said, because it seemed like the right thing to say. "She is. Takes after her mother that way." Marcus tucked the datapad away and bit into his sandwich. "Your two are getting big, too. How old are they?" The question was casual, friendly. Vrath felt his claws flex involuntarily. Sarah looked up from her work. She did not say anything, but her gaze flicked between Marcus and Vrath, and then she smoothly changed the subject. "Marcus, did you finish analyzing those soil samples from the Kepler colony?" The moment passed. Marcus started talking about his research, but Vrath noticed that Sarah had protected him from having to answer. She had seen his discomfort and responded to it without making an issue of it, without making him explain. Later, when Marcus left, Sarah said quietly, "You don't have to answer questions you're not comfortable with. If someone's being nosy, just tell them to mind their own business." "That would be rude," Vrath said. "Sometimes rude is necessary," Sarah replied. "You're allowed to have boundaries, Vrath." It was the first time she had used his name without his title. Something about it made his chest feel warm. The cubs were growing more comfortable, too. They no longer hid under the table all day. They explored the lab, always under Vrath's watchful eye, investigating equipment and sniffing at interesting smells. Sarah had installed safety locks on anything dangerous, and she taught them which buttons they were allowed to press. "Green means safe," she explained, pointing to the holographic controls. "Red means don't touch. Can you remember that?" Torvin touched a green button and a harmless light display appeared. He chirped excitedly. Kira pawed at a red button and Sarah gently redirected her paw. "Nope, not that one. That one's red. Red means no, she was teaching them. Not just tolerating their presence, but actively helping them learn. Vrath watched from his station and felt something crack open inside his chest. On Krevath, cubs were raised by their parents and no one else. Pack bonds were everything. Outsiders were threats. The idea of someone from another species, another world, another biological classification entirely, caring about what his children learned was incomprehensible. Yet here was Sarah, patiently teaching Kira the difference between safe and dangerous, praising Torvan when he remembered not to touch the red buttons. "Why do you do this?" Vrath asked suddenly. Sarah looked up, surprised. "Do what?" "Care for my offspring. Teach them. Bring them food they enjoy. Adjust the laboratory temperature for their comfort." He gestured around the space. "Why?" Sarah set down the sample container she was holding. She thought for a moment before answering. "When I was little, maybe 7 or 8, my mom took me to work with her one day. She was a nurse. I had to sit quietly in the break room and not bother anyone." Sarah smiled at the memory, but one of the other nurses brought me coloring books and crayons. Another one shared her lunch with me. They didn't have to do that. They did it because I was a kid and kids need things, attention, kindness, someone to notice them. She looked over at Kira and Torvan, who were now playing with the data cubes again. They're children. Vrath. They didn't ask to be on a space station far from home. They didn't ask to be surrounded by species who are afraid of them. The least I can do is make sure they're comfortable and safe while they're here. Vrath did not know what to say to that. In his culture, such sentiment would be seen as weakness. Caring about the offspring of another was illogical unless it served pack hierarchy. But Sarah's words did not sound weak. They sounded like simple truth. "On Krevath," he said slowly, "we do not speak of such things. Caring for cubs is private, personal." "That sounds lonely," Sarah said. It was. Vrath had never allowed himself to think about it before, but it was desperately lonely. Raising Kira and Torvan by himself, never able to ask for help, never able to admit when he was tired or overwhelmed or frightened that he was failing them. "Human young require extensive care," Sarah continued. "We're basically helpless for years. Our brains are too big to fit through the birth canal fully developed, so we're born early and finish growing outside the womb. We need our parents, yeah, but we also need the whole community. Teachers, neighbors, friends of the family. It takes a village, as the old saying goes." "A village," Vrath repeated, "a community. A group of people who look out for each other's kids." Vrath thought about the other humans on the station, the way they had started nodding to him in corridors, the way Marcus had shown him pictures of his daughter, the way the human trader had offered fruit to his cubs. They were treating him like part of their community, like someone whose children mattered. The realization was staggering. That evening, as Vrath prepared to leave the lab with his cubs, Sarah stopped him. "Hey, tomorrow is Saturday." "Station time. Marcus and some of the others are having a get-together in the rec room. Just casual. Food, conversation, nothing formal." She looked slightly uncertain. "You and the cubs are welcome to come, if you want." Vrath's first instinct was to refuse. Social gatherings were dangerous. Too many variables. Too many ways for things to go wrong. But Kira tugged on his hand and chirped hopefully. She had learned that word. Welcome. She understood the invitation even if she could not speak standard yet. "We will come," Vrath heard himself say. Sarah's smile was bright enough to rival the stars outside the window. "Great, 1800 hours. Bring whatever the cubs like to eat." As Vrath walked back to his quarters with Kira and Torvan, he thought about villages and communities and humans who invited predators to their social gatherings. He thought about a future where maybe, just maybe, his cubs could grow up knowing kindness instead of fear, where they could be both Krevathi and part of something larger. It was a dangerous hope. But Vrath was beginning to think humans specialized in dangerous things. The gathering in the rec room had been going well, too well. Vrath should have known that peace never lasted. Kira and Torvan had played with Marcus's holographic puzzles while the adults talked. Sarah had introduced Vrath to Lieutenant Chen, her cousin who worked in station security. A human engineer named Yuki had brought something called cookies and insisted Vrath try one, even though his biology was not designed for sweet foods. For 3 hours, Vrath had felt almost normal. Almost like he belonged. Then Ambassador Telvin walked into the rec room. The Zenthari diplomat was tall and elegant, his scaled skin shimmering in shades of green and blue. His large eyes were positioned on the sides of his head, giving him an almost 360-degree field of vision. Herbivore traits, prey species traits. Those eyes fixed on Vrath and his cubs, and Telvin's scales paled to a sickly white. Unacceptable, Telvin hissed, his translator rendering the word sharp and cold. I was not informed that dangerous predators would be in common areas. This is a violation of station safety protocols. The room went quiet. The humans looked confused. Vrath carefully moved between Telvin and his cubs, his instincts screaming at him to protect them. Commander Vrath has every right to be here, Sarah said, standing up. This is a public space open to all station residents. Public spaces must be safe for all species, Telvin countered. The Cravathi are known aggressors. Their cubs are unpredictable and dangerous. I have filed 14 formal complaints regarding their presence on this station. Then file a 15th, Marcus said flatly. Vrath and his kids aren't going anywhere. Telvin's scales flushed dark with anger. You humans do not understand galactic protocol. Predator species are required to maintain separation from prey species in mixed environments. It is standard practice. It has been standard practice for 3,000 years. Then maybe it's time for a new practice, Lieutenant Chen said, crossing her arms. This is not your decision to make, Telvin said. He tapped his wrist communicator. I am calling station security to remove these creatures from common areas immediately. Vrath felt his claws extend. Not from aggression, but from fear. He had known this would happen eventually. He had been foolish to hope otherwise. The cubs pressed against his leg, sensing his distress. We will leave, Vrath said quietly. There is no need for security. The hell you will, Sarah snapped. She stepped between Vrath and Telvin, her small human frame somehow commanding attention. Vrath has broken no rules. His children have broken no rules. You don't get to kick people out of public spaces because you're uncomfortable. Dr. Chen, this is not your concern, Telvin said. It absolutely is my concern. Vrath is my research partner and my friend. The word hit Vrath like a physical blow. Friend. She had called him friend. Security arrived then, 2 officers in standard uniforms. One was a Belizean, bird-like and nervous. The other was human, a broad-shouldered woman with steel-gray hair. Ambassador Telvin filed a complaint, the Belizean officer said, his voice uncertain, regarding dangerous predators in common areas. There are no dangerous predators here, the human security officer said, looking around the room. I see Commander Vrath and his children. They're residents of this station with full access rights. They are Cravathi, Telvin's voice rose. They are predators. Their very presence is a threat. So are humans, Sarah pointed out. We're predators too. Should we be banned from common areas? Humans are different, Telvin said dismissively. How? Because we're smaller? Because we don't have claws? Sarah's voice was sharp with anger.
Or because we're new to the galactic community and you think you can push us around?
More humans were arriving now, drawn by the commotion. Yuki the engineer, Dr. Santos from the medical bay, 3 technicians from the docking ring. They formed a loose group around Vrath and his cubs, not threatening, but clearly present. This is irregular, the Belizean officer said, looking increasingly uncomfortable. What's irregular is harassing a resident because of his species, the human security officer said firmly. She turned to Telvin. Ambassador, unless Commander Vrath or his children have committed an actual violation, there are no grounds for removal. They exist, Telvin shouted. Their existence near prey species is a violation. Then I guess you better file a complaint with the Galactic Council, Marcus said. Because on this station we don't discriminate based on species biology. Telvin's scales went through a rapid color change, from pale fear to dark anger and back again. You humans are foolish. You do not understand the dangers. The Cravathi are killers. Their cubs will grow into killers. This is their nature. Vrath felt something hot and painful rise in his throat. He wanted to argue, to defend his children, to explain that Cravathi were more than their predator instincts. But what could he say? Telvin was not entirely wrong. Cravathi were predators. They had evolved to hunt and kill. Their history was written in blood and conquest. You're right, Sarah said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Cravathi are predators. So are humans. So are the Volrani and the Takish and half a dozen other species on this station. You know what else we are? Parents, scientists, engineers, people. She walked over to where Kira and Torvin were huddled against their father's legs. Slowly, carefully, she knelt down beside them. Kira is learning her colors. Torvin likes picture books. They both get scared during station maintenance when the lights flicker. Sarah looked up at Telvin. They're children. And if you can't see that, if all you can see is what they might become instead of what they are, then you're the one with the problem. The silence that followed was heavy and charged. Vrath could hear his cubs breathing, could feel their small hearts racing. His own heart felt too large for his chest. I will take this to the station director, Telvin said coldly. The council will hear about this. Humans and their dangerous pets. He left, his scales still dark with anger. The security officers exchanged glances. There's no violation here, the human officer said formally. We're noting in the report that all parties were engaged in lawful recreational activities. Commander Vrath, you and your family are free to continue enjoying the common areas. The Belizean officer looked like he wanted to argue but said nothing. They both left. Vrath stood frozen. His cubs pressed against him, surrounded by humans who had just risked political consequences to defend his right to exist in public. His throat felt tight. His eyes burned. Thank you, he managed to say. You did not have to do that. Yes, we did, Sarah said firmly. Nobody gets to tell kids they don't belong somewhere just for existing. Marcus nodded. You're part of the team, Vrath. We look after our own. But I am not human, Vrath said, confused. I am not your pack. Maybe not by Kravathi standards, Sarah said. But humans have a saying. Family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up when things get hard. She smiled, though her eyes were still fierce with anger at Telvin's words. You showed up every day to work with me. You trusted me with your kids. That makes you family in my book. Kira chirped softly and reached out to touch Sarah's hand. Sarah squeezed the small paw gently. Vrath felt something shift inside him. Something fundamental and terrifying and wonderful. These humans, these strange hairless primates who had only joined the galactic community a year ago, were treating him like pack. Like family, they had stood between him and danger. They had defended his cubs. They had shown teeth to protect him. On Kravath, that meant everything. I do not know how to repay this, Vrath said hoarsely. Don't repay it, Lieutenant Chen said, leaning against the wall. Just pass it forward. Help someone else when they need it. Is that another human saying? Yeah, we've got a lot of them. You'll get used to it. The gathering continued, though the mood was more subdued now. But Vrath noticed something. The humans stayed close. They made sure he and his cubs were included in every conversation. When Torvin got tired, Yuki brought cushions without being asked. When Kira got hungry, Dr. Santos shared food from her plate. Small acts, thoughtful gestures, the same kind of care Sarah had been showing from the beginning. Later, walking back to his quarters with sleepy cubs, Vrath thought about what had happened. About Telvin's hatred and the humans' defense. About Sarah calling him family. He thought about the future, and for the first time since arriving at Harmony's Edge, he felt something like hope. The galaxy might not be ready for humans yet, but Vrath was beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, humans were exactly what the galaxy needed. 4 months after the incident with Ambassador Telvin, Vrath stood in the observation deck of Harmony's Edge and watched the most impossible thing he had ever seen. In the newly converted recreation area below, Kira and Torvin were playing with 3 human children, 2 Volrani cubs and a young Takesh. They were building something with construction blocks, the kind designed to be safe for multiple species with different types of hands and paws. A human woman sat nearby, reading a data pad but keeping one eye on the children. Next to her, a Volrani parent did the same. 2 different predator species watching their cubs play together, trusting each other enough to share the same space. It's amazing, isn't it? Sarah said, coming to stand beside him. It should not be possible, Vrath said quietly. Volrani and Kravathi have been enemies for 600 years. Our ancestors fought 3 separate wars. Your ancestors aren't here, Sarah pointed out. Your kids are, and they don't know they're supposed to hate each other. Below, Kira offered a blue block to the smaller Volrani cub. The cub chirped his thanks and added it to the structure they were building. Torvin showed one of the human children how to stack the pieces higher without them falling. They were just children playing, learning, being kind to each other because no one had taught them to be anything else. How did you do this? Vrath asked. How did humans make this happen? Sarah shrugged. We didn't do anything special. We just treated everyone's kids like they were kids. Apparently that was revolutionary, it was. 3 months ago, a Volrani military officer named Kresh had arrived at the station. She had heard about the human researchers who allowed Cravathi cubs in their laboratories. She had her own cub, a son, and nowhere safe to keep him while she worked. Sarah had welcomed them both without hesitation. Then came a Takesh engineer with 2 younglings, then a Sarkin trader with a daughter. One by one, predator species who had spent generations hiding their children away began bringing them to Harmony's Edge. The humans had responded by creating what they called a daycare cooperative, a shared space where younglings from different species could be safe while their parents worked. Human volunteers staffed it, along with parents from other species who took turns supervising. It should have been chaos. It should have been dangerous. Instead, it was working. The Galactic Council is sending observers, Vrath said. They want to study what is happening here. Let them study, Sarah said. Maybe they'll learn something, Vrath's communicator chirped. He glanced at it and felt his fur bristle. What's wrong? Sarah asked immediately. My superior officer, Commander Zvrath of the Cravathi 3rd Fleet. He is coming to the station. He wants to see how my cubs are being raised. Sarah's expression became careful. Is that bad? I do not know, Vrath admitted. Zvrath is old guard, traditional. He believes in Cravathi strength above all else. When does he arrive? 2 days, Sarah squeezed his shoulder. Then we have 2 days to prepare. Don't worry, Vrath, your kids are happy and healthy and learning. That's what matters, but Vrath worried anyway. He knew what Zvrath would see. Cravathi cubs playing with other species. A Cravathi warrior working alongside humans. Weakness, vulnerability. Everything their culture said to hide. Commander Zvrath arrived exactly on schedule. He was older than Vrath by 30 years. His fur streaked with gray, his amber eyes sharp and assessing. He walked with the confident gait of a warrior who had never lost a fight. Vrath met him at the docking ring, his cubs standing straight and formal beside him. Commander Vrath, Zvrath said. His voice was like grinding stone. Your cubs. Present them. Kira, Torvin. Vrath kept his voice steady. Greet your elder. The cubs bowed in the traditional Cravathi manner, paws crossed over their chests. Zvrath circled them slowly, examining them like he would examine troops. They are small, Zvrath said. Weak. Vrath felt his claws extend involuntarily. They are growing well, healthy. We shall see. Zvrath turned to him. Show me your work. Show me how you raise cubs among aliens. Vrath led him to the laboratory. Sarah was there, along with Marcus and 2 other human researchers. She looked up when they entered and smiled. Commander Zvrath, welcome to Harmony's Edge. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, Vrath's research partner. Zvrath stared at her. You are human. Last time I checked, yes. You work with Cravathi. Every day. Vrath is brilliant. Best colleague I've ever had. Zvrath's expression was unreadable. He looked around the laboratory, taking in the temperature controls, the soft mats under the tables, the picture books stacked neatly in the corner. You accommodate cubs in a research facility, he said. Of course, Sarah said, like it was obvious. Vrath's children need somewhere safe while he works. This is somewhere safe. On Cravath, cubs remain with family, in protected dens, away from outsiders. On Earth, we have a saying, Sarah replied. It takes a village to raise a child. Community makes us stronger, not weaker. Zvrath's ears flattened against his skull. Zvrath recognized the sign of deep thought, possibly confusion. You are predators, Zvrath said. Yet you speak like pack. We are pack, Marcus said, joining the conversation. Just a bigger pack than you might be used to. Zvrath turned to Vrath. This is how you raise your cubs? Among aliens? Teaching them to trust outsiders? Vrath felt his heart pounding. This was the moment. He could back down, claim he was following orders, pretend this was all temporary, or he could tell the truth. Yes, he said firmly. This is how I raise them, and they are thriving. Show me, Zvrath commanded. Vrath took him to the daycare cooperative. The space was full of younglings from 7 different species. Human volunteers moved among them, helping with activities, settling disputes, ensuring everyone was safe and included. Kira and Torvin were in the center of the room, building something complex with the Volrani cubs and a small group of human children. They chirped greetings when they saw their father, then returned to their project. Zvrath stood absolutely still. Vrath could not read his expression. That is a Volrani cub, Zvrath said quietly. Yes, your cubs play with Volrani. Yes, they should be enemies. They are children, Vrath said. They are not enemies. They are friends. Zrath watched for a long time. He watched a human child fall and scrape her knee. He watched a Volrani parent comfort her while another human got bandages. He watched Torvin share his toys with a Takesh youngling. He watched Kira show a smaller cub how to stack blocks without them falling. This is not Krivathi, Zrath said finally. No, Vrath agreed. It is not. It is weak, vulnerable. Against everything we teach, Vrath's claws extended fully. It is not weak. Look at them, Commander. My cubs are not afraid. They are confident, strong. They know how to work with others, how to build instead of just fight. They are learning skills that will make them better than we were. Better? Zrath's voice was dangerous. Yes, better. Vrath turned to face his superior officer directly. We Krivathi have been alone for generations. Strong alone, feared alone. And what has it gained us? The galaxy keeps us at arm's length. They use us as weapons and fear us as monsters. Our cubs grow up learning to trust no one, to see everyone as threat or prey. He gestured to the room full of playing children. Here, my cubs learn something different. They learn that strength comes from community. That predators can work together instead of competing. That being fierce protectors does not mean being alone. Zrath said nothing. His amber eyes moved from the playing cubs to Vrath and back again. Humans did this, Vrath continued. Humans who barely know us, who have no reason to trust us, who would be justified in fearing us. They looked at my cubs and saw children who needed care. They offered kindness without asking for anything in return. They defend us when others attack. They treat us like family. And you believe this makes you strong? Zrath asked. I believe it makes my cubs stronger than I ever was, Vrath said quietly. They will grow up knowing how to fight, yes. But they will also know how to build, how to trust, how to be part of something larger than themselves. Zrath was silent for a long moment. Then he did something Vrath had never seen him do before. He sat down. Right there on the floor of the daycare center, he lowered himself to the level of the cubs. Kira noticed him first. She chirped curiously and approached with the cautious confidence of a child raised with gentleness. She held up the structure she had been building. Show me, Zrath said. For the next hour, the old Krivathi warrior sat with the cubs and learned about their games. He asked questions. He listened. He watched the way they interacted with other species' younglings, the way they shared and cooperated and solved problems together. When it was time to leave, Zrath stood and faced Vrath. I came here to tell you that you were failing your cubs, he said, that you were making them weak. I was wrong. Vrath felt his breath catch. The galaxy is changing, Zrath continued. Humans are changing it, and perhaps that is not a bad thing. He looked back at the cubs one more time. I will report to the Krivathi Council that what happens here on Harmony's Edge should be studied, perhaps replicated. Commander, your cubs are strong, Vrath, strong in ways we never taught them to be. Perhaps it is time we learn from our children. After Zrath left, Sarah found Vrath in the observation deck again, watching the stars. How did it go? She asked. Better than I hoped, Vrath said. He understood. Of course he did. Your kids are amazing. Thank you for watching and comment for